Hello and welcome to another reading with Clyde. Today I am looking at an episode by Alan Watts on death. And this basically is a confluence of Eastern wisdom and exploring ideas related to death and Tibetan Buddhism, the wheel of life, etc. I have often puzzled about what it must be like to go to sleep and never wake up, to be simply not there forever and ever. After all, one has some intimation of this by the interval that separates going to sleep from waking. When we don't have any dreams but go to sleep, and then suddenly we are there again. And in the interim, there was nothing. And if there was never any end to that interval, if the waking up didn't happen, that's such a curious thought. And yet, I believe that although there's a rather gloomy kind of consideration, I've found that one of the most creative thoughts I ever thought in my life, and I keep going back to it. You know, it's in line with a lot of the very fundamental questions that children ask when they say, Mommy, who would I have been if you had married someone else? These are the kind of questions that make us puzzle profoundly about our existence, and one of the reasons why I think thinking about not being, about total non existence, is so creative is that, in comparison with that thought, the fact we are seems kind of queer, incredibly odd. But in the Western world, I suppose, we have two dominant ideas about what happens to us when we die. There's the old fashioned idea that after we die, we go to another world. I say old fashioned, but not to say it's out of date. We don't know what the answer to this is, but that's the traditional answer of the Western world. When you die, you go to another life, maybe heaven, maybe purgatory, maybe hell. Who knows? I think nowadays, though, the more general idea, the more plausible idea to many people is that when we die, we just cease to be. That's all there is to it. But we're inclined, I think, to have in our minds a picture of this, which indeed is depressing, of being shut up in the dark for always and always and always, to be kind of buried alive in blackness, where we are blind, deaf, and dumb, but somehow still conscious. But in the Eastern world, there are different ideas of this. The major Eastern idea is what is generally known as reincarnation, of going to life after life after life in an endless series, a process that is represented in the Japanese print of the Wheel of Life. The Buddhist Wheel of Life. This painting was lent to me by Mr. and Mrs. Emura of Berkeley in California. He used to be the priest of the Berkeley Buddhist Church, and it shows the wheel of stages of existence through which beings pass, clutched by the great demon of impermanence. This is rather an unusual representation of the wheel of life. Perhaps some of you have seen these before. They usually have six divisions in the central part of the wheel here, and this one happens to have five. And it's the Chinese Japanese version of the Buddhist wheel of life. Whereas I think prints in books, I know there was one some years ago in Life magazine, usually show the Tibetan version. But what we have here, and I think what I'll do is I'll explain to begin with it the popular interpretation of it. And then we go to see the more philosophical Buddhists tend to think of it in a deeper way. These then are the five or sometimes six realms of existence through which I said beings pass through various lives. We could start here, for example. This is the human world, and then next to this is the world of Devas, which we would translate into English as angels. Then this is the world of animals. This is the world is sometimes called hell. Only that's not quite an accurate term for it. It should be called the world of purgatories, because in this scheme of the universe there's no everlasting state. There is no everlasting heaven and there is no everlasting hell. The demon of impermanence clutches the whole thing, and they all terminate. Next to the hells, there's a realm of what they call pretas. They are frustrated spirits, sometimes shown with very large stomachs and very tiny mouths, enormous appetite, but very small means of satisfying it. And the idea is, you see, that in the course of his development, the individual goes through life after life. If he does well, he ascends towards the heavens. If he does ill, he descends to the hells. Or he may fall from the human state to the animal state, or fall from the human state to the state of ghost. But the point that has to be remembered in the Buddhist idea of transmigration or reincarnation is that you can never stop anywhere. You may ascend to heaven, but what goes up must eventually come down. You may descend to hell, but what goes down may eventually go up. And so one goes on and on, moving through these various worlds until, in the Buddhist ideas, you become sufficiently awakened to become a Buddha. One who is released from the wheel and who does not fall anymore into the sequence of rebirths but enters the state of nirvana. Now, if you will look closer again, you will see there are a number of figures round the and outside the wheel. All these represent what is the 12-fold chain of dependent origination. This is to say that there are a series of links which form that might be called the sequence of life. They are, as it were, a schematic diagram of the force of the process that keeps this wheel rotating. And the chain starts with a demon down at the bottom here who represents ignorance or perhaps unconsciousness, the state of not knowing. Then, next in order, you see a potter's wheel, and this represents potentialities of life. Next comes a monkey who represents consciousness. A man in a boat. For some reason, this represents a combination of name and form, words bringing out shapes, words identifying shapes and things in the world. Here comes sense consciousness, the five senses, a man's body with the senses exposed, and here comes contact, a pair of lovers. After this, there comes perception. I'm not quite sure what the symbol in this wheel is. It seems to show a man with a sword behind a screen and two women playing in front of the screen. The usual symbol you find here for perception is a man with an arrow in his eye, showing the pain involved in the perception of the world. The next is the link is desire. It shows a woman with twins. The next one here is called grasping and shows a man with a basket into which he is trying to get the fruits of life. And then we come over round the wheel, we get a figure which means growth. I think this one is of the gods of prosperity, but it means growth, the fullness of life. Here is birth, the woman in parturition. Here is old age, and then although the final stage of the links of dependent origination, as they are usually drawn, shows this one as the last and calls it old age and death. In this particular wheel, they've been spread out so that you get old age, grief, no, excuse me, this is sickness, old age, sickness, death, grief, compassion, suffering, and again back into ignorance. Here's another figure of ignorance, a camel being led by a blind man. Now, what I want you to notice particularly about this is that the chain represents what is called in Sanskrit the process of karam or karma, as you say in the West. I'm going to write that word because it's very fundamental to an understanding of this whole problem. Karam is sometimes understood, and maybe your original dictionaries give it to you as the law of cause and effect. But actually, it comes from the root kri, which in Sanskrit means to act or to do. And the basic idea of karma is that it is action which always involves the necessity for other action. As the Buddha once expressed it, this arises, that becomes. Now, this isn't quite the same thing as cause and effect, it's rather the idea of linkage. For example, when I pick up this brush, I lift it by one end and the other end comes up. Now we could say this is cause and effect, although this would be rather cumbersome way of thinking about it. I would say, for example, that the coming up of the brush at this end is the effect of the cause by lifting it at this end. But we don't ordinarily think so complicatedly about it. We think in a simpler fashion, namely that to pick up this end is also to lift up that end because it's all one. So in the same way, Buddhists and Hindus who have followed the idea of karma believe that life and death involve each other in the same way that the two ends of the brush. Lifting up one involves lifting up the other. So, in this way, living involves dying. We wouldn't say that the cause of death is birth, but birth and death go together and they are inseparable. I'm going to stop here right now, and I hope you enjoyed this one. It's very interesting to think, like, when if you even don't believe in a life after death, what is it? I had read this short story by Irvin Welsh, uh, and that was way back in my 20s, where it had a short story where he spoke about what if it is over, there's nothing at the end of life. It is all over. That's it. All you have is this one life that you live. This does not sit well with every theory, mostly of organized religions or unorganized religions. Most people believe in reincarnation or either punishment or rewards for your journey through life. To be honest, I do not know, and I cannot ever know what it is at the end of life. I mean, how can you believe in stories, or your experience is basically what it is? So, even if there is no reward or there is punishment, the basics is to live a good life rather than to worry about that for me. It's always been that, to do what you can now rather than think about either rewards or punishments later. Just do your best to live a better life and make life better for people around you. Have a good one. Take care. Bye bye.